Good morning, Jeff Bana, and Happy New Year on this last day of 2024.
Good morning, Andrew. Very good to see you.
As always, you're going to notice today that I'm dressed in shades of blue, including my glasses.
Oh,
And that is to signify blue skies ahead for the Vancouver real estate market. I think
very
that it's going to
nice.
be we're turning a corner in 2025. In fact, I think we've already turned a bit of a corner at the back end of 2024. And I think it's sunnier skies ahead. It's not going to be a boom market, but I think we're going to see a nice pickup in activity as we head into the new year. And I think buyers should be aware. I think the bottom of the market might be behind us, and it's going to be a more active real estate market here in the Lower Mainland as we head into 2025.
Well, excellent. I accept.
Anything we can do to sort of, grab onto those optimistic purse strings.
Absolutely. And also our standard disclaimers. We want to offer relevant, actionable information. That said, this is not investment advice, and we're better realtors than accountants, lawyers, and financial advisors. We are also owners of Vancouver real estate. We like it when prices go up, and we make a fee when we help you out.
There you go. So we've got a vested interest in seeing this market turn a corner.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
we're doing our quick review or our long review of 2024. What kinds of things do you recall from 2024 that really helped shape the real estate market in Vancouver?
Well, I think when we look back a year, we were making these predictions. I think it actually came out pretty well, unless you think otherwise, Jeff. We started the year off again. It's kind of sluggish this time last year. We had a bit of a spring blip in the market, but for the most part, it was a fairly lackluster year. I think interest rates and economic concerns. We had a couple of elections in there, affordability issues, new taxation, a lot of things going on that sort of, put a drag on the market. And then, of course, Bank of Canada reversed course mid-year, started to lower the benchmark rate. Took a few months for things to kick in. All of a sudden, October came along, and we saw a nice pickup in sales volumes, and that's carried on through the end of the year. And again, we attribute that really, I think, to lowering interest rates, elections behind us, and that sort of cleared a path for maybe a more robust 2025. I should say, though, what I think is going to be a big sort of thing that people are going to be focusing on as we get into the early part of this year. I'm going to go out on a limb, but I think most people are going to agree. I think we've got an election right in front of us in the next 60 days. It's going to be another election, federal election here in Canada. So is that going to weigh on the market? Don't know. But that's sort of my read on kind of where we were this time last year up until the end of 2024. Now we've got an election, but we've also got interest rates continuing to come down. Bank of Canada is going to meet towards the end of January, and we're going to see another 25 basis point cut.
Right. I wrote down a number of things, starting with interest rates. As you mentioned, the Bank of Canada adjusted the rates 5 times starting in June, taking the overnight rate down from 5% to 3.25%. That, I think, resulted in more certainty for buyers and less panic about rising rates. Buyers that had been on the sidelines, waiting, felt more confident, moved forward with purchases. And the main takeaway for me on that is if you're in the wrong place and you need to be in someplace different, you can't wait forever. So we saw a lot of pent up demand in October and November coming to fruition. And that resulted in sort of an end of the year. There was a lot more activity than there had been the previous fall.
Yeah. Yeah, no question about it. It's that bandwagon. People start to see other people doing it. All of a sudden, it's a signal that the market has shifted off the fence into the market.
And I think your point, Andrew, that we may have seen the bottom behind us. I think you might be right on that, in that in 2024, there was a lot more homes for sale. And all of last year, we were saying, like, if you need to buy a place, now's a great time to do it. And I know that sounded very self-serving for us because we wanted to get our listing sold. But the truth of it is there's a lot more homes for sale last year. In April, active listings went above 12,000, a more than 40% increase from April of the year before. In June, the total number of properties listed reached more than 14,000, which is 20% above the seasonal 10-year average. At the end of summer, just under 14,000 listings, again, 20% above the seasonal 10-year. In November, 13,000. That was 25% above the 10-year average. And what that's meant is buyers had a lot more to choose from. They had time to choose what they wanted. What it's meant for sellers, they had to learn to negotiate again in a way they haven't for the last 10 years, except for 2019. And they had to realize that if they wanted to sell, they had to acclimate from competition from other sellers and realize that the buyers were really calling the shots. So sellers could still sell great homes, well-priced homes, always in short supply, and they can sell quickly. Just not everything was selling at 100% plus of the asking price.
And it's amazing, we had a number of clients, buyer clients looking to buy, and we were able to secure them fantastic properties. And the process just involved the one offer, just them offering. We weren't in multiple offers in many occasions. So if you were working with clients looking to buy a home in 2024, for the most part, it was an absolute pleasure. Buyers were able to do their due diligence. They weren't, there wasn't a lineup of buyers behind them, and great properties came to the market and we were the only offer. And so it was just an absolute pleasure. And as you know, Jeff, going back, you and I have been doing this for 3+ decades. You think of Vancouver and you're working with buyers, for the most part, for the whole time, it's always multiple offers on good properties. You're always having to compete. You're always having to sort of do that awkward step up with an offer and have no conditions attached, make it a clean offer if you want to be successful. So 2024 allowed buyers to sort of take a deep breath, get into the market without having to compete, and with the ability to do their due diligence, which made it an absolute pleasure. One other question I have for you, because you talked about the increase in supply in 2024, more homes on the market. What did that actually do to months of supply? Because that's the key factor is, months of supply. Where does that stand, or where did that sort of go in 2024? And where do we sit now as far as how much product is on the market in months of supply?
So months of supply has been higher this year or this past year than it was in 2023. And due in large part to sales volumes, they were all over the place. But the general trend was that there was a higher absorption rate over the course of the year. And what that's meant is there's been a little softening of prices that we saw, and that's what the buyers have taken advantage of.
But prices across the board, for the most part, unless I'm missing something, with the exception of maybe the high-end luxury market, have stayed fairly intact. We haven't seen a big drop in prices. Prices have definitely softened to some degree, but nothing dramatic. Would you agree with that?
I would. In fact, I went back to take a look at it. And the composite benchmark price, the housing price index, or the HPI. Now, this isn't the average or the median, and not to totally geek out on this, for a variety of statistical reasons, both of those measures can be somewhat misleading when we're talking about market prices. So, like when you sell a stock or buy a stock, you know the exact market value.
Yeah.
Houses are not commoditized the same way. So everyone is a little bit different, and every buyer sees value a little bit differently. Every seller's motivation can be a little bit different. So it can be tough to measure what prices are actually doing. The housing price index, or the HPI, as you call it, attempts to assign a value to a typical house with a number of attributes and see what it sells for. Right. So there's a benchmark price from the past, and then it's determined how much that typical house went up or down in value in a year. So it's a little bit more reliable to say what happened. And because the average can be remarkably affected by one or two sales. So you remember in June, we talked about that house in West Point Grey that sold for $44 million. Highest ever sale of a home on MLS. So let's say that was 40 million above the average, which was around 4 million for Vancouver West that month.
Okay.
It spread across the other 86 sales that occurred. And then in the June average was almost 500,000 more than it would have been had that sale not occurred. So if we're using the average, it tells us that home prices went up 12% in June.
So you got to be careful with those. You almost need to cut those outliers off because they can skew it up or down.
Well, you do, or just go ahead and use the HPI. So, and that showed the more accurate measure that there was about a 0.3% increase, less than 1% that month. So with all that lead in, the HPI for Greater Vancouver as of the end of November for all residential showed a 1-year change of down less than 1%.
So the market, I think, across the board remains intact. It remains very stable. There are segments of the market that have definitely seen some price decline. I think the luxury high-end condos,
Yes.
big time. We've got a pre-sale condo market that's basically flat on its back. Developers are doing what they can right now to create incentives to bring buyers in. Many pre-sale projects have folded because of a lack of buyer interest. And so a lot of things going on in the overall market. It's really neighborhood and area specific, but on average in the Lower Mainland, the market seems fairly stable. Not a lot of price up or down, probably a little bit more to the down, but nothing dramatic. But really for the listeners that are sitting on a piece of property or thinking of buying in a certain market, they should contact their realtor or us to really get a read as to what's going on in that specific.
They should just call us, period.
Just call us. You're right. Sorry. I was just trying to be a good guy, but yes. But to find out really what's going on in their market, because that could be very different than, say, what's going on in the overall market, right?
100%. And Andrew, that really shows up in the different property types. Like
last
year, detached houses were actually up 1%. Townhouses up 1.8%. And as you described, apartments were down 1.2%. But it's even within those subcategories, the subcategories, depending if you're in the luxury end of the market or the more affordable end of the market, some things were actually up significantly. Other things were down significantly.
Yeah. So I think the listeners really have to sort of understand what's going on in their specific market where they own real estate or thinking of buying real estate, because it could be very different from the average, correct?
Definitely.
Okay.
And, we saw that too, just in the sales volumes. In 2024, they were a little bit all over the place. In January, residential sales were 40% higher than in 2023. Not the sales, not prices. So the actual number of transactions. In June, sales were down 20% from the year before. Then in October, sales were 30% higher than in 2023.
So quite a swing, right? Quite a swing.
Quite a swing, like massive, like I haven't seen. Now, still well below the seasonal long-term averages.
Yeah.
So despite some of those months with year-over-year increases, total sales in 2024 were still below the long-term averages, but higher than they were in 2023.
So something positive to grasp onto. And then that brings us to 2025. Sunnier skies ahead. Maybe, possibly. I think it is. What do you think is going to happen as we get into this new year?
I want to talk about one more thing you mentioned before we go to 2025.
Okay, go ahead.
So the other big influence on what happened last year, government policy changes, and really two big ones here.
Yeah.
First, the extension of the foreign buyer ban.
Yeah.
The second, the proposed increase to the capital gains tax inclusion rate. So talk a little bit about the foreign buyer ban first. Now it's been in effect for 2 years and extended for 2 more. So
when is that running out now? Foreign buyers ban?
The original 2-year was up tomorrow.
Okay.
And then so they've extended it 2 more years. So it'll be January 1st, 2027.
Got it. Okay.
So my question, Andrew, is this, and I have an answer. Do you think that's been effective in controlling prices, or is it just window dressing? He asked with a loaded answer.
Yeah, it's a bit of a tough one, because from what I heard from stats, and I didn't believe them, that the foreign buyers only made up a minuscule percentage of buyer activity in the marketplace. But again, maybe that was across the board, across the country, because this is a federal ban.
Yeah.
I see that it had a fairly dramatic impact in our market in Vancouver, especially the West Side and the luxury condo market, because many of those buyers for those sort of properties were foreign buyers. There's no question. So I think it's had, in our local Vancouver market, in certain market segments, luxury condos, luxury real estate, West Side, I think it's definitely had a material impact on the overall market, because again, who were the buyers for those expensive luxury properties? Many of them were foreign buyers, there's no question. So I think it has had a material impact.
I'm a little bit not in that camp, in that I think they'd already been actively discouraged from 2016 forward by having to pay initially a 15 and then a 20% transfer tax premium. So I think there's still a lot of buyers that we look at and say, oh, these are from outside the country. But I think most of them were permanent residents or already living, or families that had been longtime Vancouver residents. So I don't actually know how much of an effect the ban has had in Vancouver. I think certainly there's been a lot of policies that have actively discouraged people.
It's been a whole confluence of just numerous government initiatives, policies, additional taxation to sort of, disincentivize the buyers out there, especially a lot of the investor buyers, correct?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Then speaking of investor buyers, I think the larger issue for last year was the raising of the capital gains inclusion rate. So on gains above 250,000, it was raised from 50% to two-thirds, 67%. And, a lot of the commentary that was coming from the federal government, oh, this is only going to affect a very small percentage of people that are having those gains. I think the thing that they failed to take into account was that almost all the gains over 250,000 are the result of, not some billionaire who's taking in profits, but mom and pop operators who they bought their first house 40 years ago, and then they were smart enough to buy another one 10 years later, and then they've been holding it. And now, not that they're super wealthy, but they just have had a nice ride up in values. And now they're getting dinged on an extra 80,000 per million on tax on these assets that they've taken the risk. They've done the work. They've had the patience and they've held it for that long. And so I'm against it, but I can also see why they were doing it.
I know from speaking to a number of clients that had plans to sell their investment property in 2024, that the new tax, the new inclusion rate gave them reason not to list, not to go to the market, thinking that possibly a change of government in 2025 would reverse that tax back. And there's a possibility that they save tax by holding off. And so I think it's caused a lot of investor clients or people that have substantial built up equity in their revenue properties to hold off from selling and stay off the market. So again, it's possibly kept supply down as well.
Well, and I'm sure you saw the same thing. As soon as it was announced, prior to that June 25th deadline, we had a raft of phone calls of people either setting up trusts to crystallize gains under the current rate, the old one, or rushing to market and getting sold and trying to beat that deadline. So also my understanding on that is the proposal is not yet law. So, and as you pointed out, the current government seems to be a little caught up in I think probably thinking that there's going to be a leadership change and potentially an election. So I agree with you as well. If the government wants to increase the supply of homes in the market, they should have a conversation with their economists and see what the effects of increased frictional costs have on liquidity.
Yeah.
It's kind of a fancy way of saying if there's more barriers to sell, like paying more tax, the supply is just going to further contract. And if demand holds constant, prices will then rise. So we'll have to see if they're successful in getting the policy in place. And of course, we're not accountants. Please talk to your accountant.
Yeah, no question about it. No question. That brings us to another tax that comes into law tomorrow, the BC flipping tax, another 20% tax on gains. This is a provincial tax. And this is really, I think, impacting, again, that investor market, these speculators that go out, buy a property and sell it within a couple of years. I think there's other people that are going to get caught up in that as well. People that bought a property and for just reasons of life happening, have to sell within 2 years because of a relocation or divorce or something like that. And they're going to get caught up in this. That also, I think, has disincentivized investors for entering the market and purchasing real estate. So again, a lot of government policy, additional taxation, which is really, in my opinion, choking the market. And we're seeing complete signs of that, especially in the pre-sale market, where these developers rely on speculators and investors to come in, sell those early units so they can get their financing. Those people have pulled the plug. They're not buying because now if they sell, they got to pay another additional 20% tax on any gain. So it's just wiping out any potential for profit.
Well, it's doing more than that. I mean, the thing that people fail to realize in a lot of these government policies, like, do we want more tax revenue? Yeah. Does it look good for us when we penalize people that are taking risks in the market and maybe making a profit? Yeah, as a government, it totally looks good for you.
Yeah.
But the reality is their stated purpose is to not have the affordability be completely eroded in the marketplace, that there is some accommodation for everyone. And the way to do that is make it easier for people to provide rentals, make it easier for people to buy, fix, and resell properties. Like anytime you start doing policy to contract a market or limit people's ability to go out and add value to something, I think it's really problematic.
Yeah, it has an adverse effect. It chokes off supply. And so all of a sudden, less supply, higher prices. So
Exactly.
it's not achieving what they're intending to achieve. It's the reverse.
No, it's not. And all
Yeah.
they need to do is ask us.
Well, they're talking to the wrong people.
That's right. So, what do you think is going to happen in 2025? I know you've talked about it a little bit. I've got some ideas too.
Yeah, well, I think again, we've got a Bank of Canada that's now in a rate reducing cycle. So we're going to see another 25 points most likely come off in January. From what I hear out there, the benchmark rate, which sits at 3.25, potentially bottoms out somewhere in the summer in the twos, on the low twos. So it's got a ways to go. That's no question going to give buyers more comfort to step into the market. We've talked about this before, though. That doesn't mean that the longer term mortgages are going to step by step come down, because they're tied to the 5-year Canadian bond yields or bond rates. And so those yields have actually trended up a little bit higher. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with the 5-year mortgage rates. I think they will edge down. There's economic weakness in the country, and I think that will have an impact on longer term interest rates, with potentially rates sort of easing down. But I do see a more robust market. I think, like you said earlier, people can only wait so long. They can only put their plans on hold for so long. So people that have been thinking of selling for a couple of years, holding off because the market was weak, this is probably a great time to sort of get back into the market with more buyers circulating. So I think we're going to see a year with more activity. What level of activity we'll see? No question it's going to be higher than 2024, because the first 6 months of 2024 saw very low volumes, way below 10-year averages. So I think we're going to see those numbers come up dramatically. Whether they come up above the 10-year average numbers, obviously we don't know. Remax Canada released a report this past week saying house prices are going to increase across the country on an average of 5%. Who knows where they get these numbers from? I don't know. It's anyone's guess. Everyone's got a different read on it, but I do see a more robust market going into 2025. Interest rates are the big thing. And I think the fact that people have been holding off for a couple of years, it's time for them to get on with their lives, and whether they're buyers or sellers, enter into the market.
I used ChatGPT to pull, analyze, and graph the end of December supply numbers we were talking about earlier. So the absorption rate versus the end of January housing price index for Greater Vancouver going back 10 years. And what we found was when there was greater than 6 months supply at the end of December, prices usually were down at the end of January. When there was less than 6 months supply at the end of December, prices typically were up a little bit at the end of January. So, according to that information, what we're going to probably see, I think currently at the end of December, we had just over 6.05 months supply, which would indicate we're going to have just a tiny bit of downwards pressure on the housing price index. And I think for the reasons that you just mentioned, there's a lot of pent up demand out there. I think people are feeling generally more positive and that they can't wait forever. I'm going to go against the statistics and say, yes, I think we're going to see a very robust January. And I think that's going to lead into a stronger, stabler spring market.
Do you think the election, and I'm talking as if it's already going to happen, but I think many Canadians feel we're going to have an election in the next couple of months, 2, 3 months. Let's assume we do have one, or one gets called. Do you think that's going to have an impact on the market?
I think it could. And it's funny because when I look back at the two elections that we had in October, people didn't wait until the elections were over they started to jump right in like at the beginning of October before either of them had occurred. So I think there might be a little bit of a braking effect while we're waiting to see what happens. But as soon as an election's called, then I think it's sort of a foregone conclusion, and the market's already going to price it in for activity and for prices.
Yeah, I think, as I said, going back to, not to keep repeating, when you've been on hold for 2 years plus, whether you're a buyer or seller, how long do you keep waiting, right? And rates are coming down, so it's definitely in one's favor now. It looks like it's a more opportune time. And I think for buyers, people looking to buy, I think there's pockets of phenomenal value in our market in Vancouver. I see certain segments where the sales activity for certain types of properties has been flat on its back. And I think there's property owners out there, whether they're small developers or they are just regular homeowners that have been sitting trying to sell for the last 6, 8 months, no bids or no bids coming in that are giving them any reason to make a move. I think there's motivated sellers, and I think there's potentially pockets of good value to be had for those buyers that are buying in those certain types of markets.
I think so too. I mean, sellers are going to be successful if they listen to the market and price according to demand. And buyers will be successful if they act quickly for well-priced, attractive homes. Aspirational pricing on the part of sellers, I think, is going to result still in frustration. And buyers looking for major bargains, I think, is likely going to result in disappointment. So my old thing is there's no shame in accepting a fair offer for a house if you want to sell. And there's no shame in paying a fair price for a home if it's something that meets your needs and you think you're going to be there for a while. So we'll keep on top of the market generally. And that's kind of what I'm thinking.
Yeah, and I think we've pointed this out before, Jeff. Real estate is a long-term investment, right? And many property owners and investors over the last 20 plus years have had this idea that they could buy real estate, they could buy a pre-sale, and 6, 8 months later flip it, or a year or two later flip it, make a nice profit. And absolutely, that took place in many years in Vancouver because the market was rising. You could almost buy anything and just sit on it and make a nice tidy profit. But in average terms, in average years, and say going over the last 30 years, there are times when if you buy real estate, you've got to hold it for 5 or 10 years to see and realize a decent profit. It's a long-term investment, and we still get calls from potential buyers. Andrew, we're looking to buy a property. Our time horizon is only a couple of years. We're hoping to sort of turn it around, flip it, make some good money, and then do something else. And we always try to educate them that that is not, typically a smart strategy, or if you have expectations that you're going to make a nice tidy gain in the next 1 or 2 years by holding that property, doesn't always work out. And there's a lot of property owners out there that have been bitten hard by having that idea and have it not come to fruition. And so it's a long-term investment. And if you buy, and like you said, if you pay a fair price for something and you look back in 5 or 10 years, you're probably going to be just fine, right? If your expectation is that you're going to make 100% profit over the next 2, 3 years, you're probably going to be somewhat disappointed.
Yes. And the thing that I go back to is if you need a place to live and you're doing it for the long term, the people that I look at in this business that have done the best, that have been the most successful with purchasing real estate, they're simply the people that found a great house, that met their needs, found a great condo, found a great townhouse. They moved in and they lived there. And then they made a bit of a career about saying no. Yeah. They stayed, they paid it off. They took advantage of a lift in the market. They traded up eventually or downsized when they were finished with it. But there wasn't a lot of trading in and out of the market.
It was their home. They weren't buying it as an investment. They were buying it as a place to live, enjoy their lives, and enjoy the city.
Yeah. And the ones that bought as investment, they never took a look at it as speculation. They looked at it as investment where, this is what I'm buying. This is how much I'm going to rent it for. This is what's going to cost me to hold it. And this is what my projection is that the mortgage is going to be paid down. And I'm going to take advantage of that leverage over 5, 10, 15, 25 years. And then they've been successful with that. It's not a casino where you could just sort of walk in, throw down a little bit of money, and then hopefully you'll win a bunch back or do whatever. It's a lot more measured. It's a lot more structured, and much more patience is required to really profit from it.
Yeah. Take advantage of that long-term horizon. Buy, hold, accumulate,
Yeah, exactly.
right? Hey, Jeff, it's New Year's Eve.
Yes.
And we'll be talking on the other side of the January New Year. And we'll tell our listeners kind of, I think we'll probably check in the next, towards the end of the month, give everyone a read on sort of how things are sort of shaping up 1 month in, so to speak, here or there. Anything else you want to add?
I think one of the important things that we're going to have a conversation about is how technology is shaping the market. It would also be interesting to take a look at what's happening in construction for market housing and rental development, some of the public and private partnerships that have been going on. So I'm just basically looking forward to another exciting year in real estate. And I know we're both looking forward to helping all of our listeners. And then, so the shameless plug, if you need help getting a home sold, call us.
Yeah, I mean, we want to say thanks to all our amazing clients over the last year, plus beyond that have supported us and trusted us to help them with their real estate purchases and sales. We're truly grateful.
Awesome. So I'm Jeff Benna, Andrew Hasman, and this is Industry Vancouver.
Take care. Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year, everybody. Thanks for tuning in today. We appreciate your time and your attention. If we can be of further help or information, we look forward to hearing from you. We respectfully acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Coast Salish people, including the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations.